Good afternoon, everyone. Again, as before, it's a bit difficult to tell whether people really have rejoined or I've just got Zoom still open. I will assume that let's see, our panel members, are they appearing? Yes. Good, great, fantastic. So, right, thank you very much, and I hope people have had a decent break. I had a peanut butter sandwich. I really should stop eating peanut butter. Right, anyway, so there are a lot of questions that we have received, just to mention that, and colleagues Paul and Emma have been keeping track of those, so we've got those all collated together. So as I said, we will come back to those and make sure that they are answered after the event, if they're not opportunities now. So I think really now is an opportunity to raise issues or ask questions of the panelists and the speakers that we had before lunch. You can again put those questions in the Q&A tab. And I do have one to start with, which is since colleagues from RCA mentioned, the issue of third-party rights management and rights clearance, I just wondered if it was possible for perhaps, who would I go to? Matt, Claire and Joanna to just share your perspectives on how that works for you, because I think, anyway, it's there's so many different contexts, so I think it would just be helpful to have a bit of insight into that, if that's possible. So could I start with you, Matt?
I'm going to use the absolute cop-out card that actually Martin would be far closer to that than I would actually know the mechanics, and I can only really sort of poke around that a bit, other than obviously something we're very actively engaged in and have rights and clearance colleagues who work very closely with that within libraries, museums and galleries here at Liverpool. But I won't try and ham-fist an answer, so I don't actually have hands-on experience, I'll confess.
Very good. We're all going to end up with hands-on experience, but so is it okay to go to you, Claire?
Could you just say
I just wondered, in terms of obviously clearing the rights to third-party materials within outputs, and we have within this policy, we do have an exemption, which means that if it's prohibitive to get that clearance, then you don't have to be open access, but obviously the preference is to be open access, and there are modes of different things and decisions to be made, and also third-party materials can be have a more restrictive license on them, because the license that we seek doesn't apply to those materials, clearly. But I just wondered, from your experience, whether you have experience of clearing third-party materials and how it generally works. Just any observations?
I think because my work's historical, I've got that things are out of copyright.
Right, yeah.
I'm quite lucky in that respect, although towards the end it does become a bit trickier. But I think in terms of images, for example, I think I was spoilt by the use of welcome images, which are free. So I think that was really, really helpful in that respect. And the images I used tended to be from that particular collection.
That's really helpful. And I think that's one of the things it's also kind of getting to know what collections are available under different terms. Joanna, have you any?
Yeah, so I think my experience is different from Claire's, because I'm working on the last couple of books anyway on contemporary art. So what I decided to do was to use a a non-commercial no derivatives Creative Commons license, which the publishers were very happy with. And that meant that I then had to get individual agreement from all of the artists to release those images under a Creative Commons license. But actually they were all really happy to do that because obviously they knew that the book was going to be published open access, that this was going to help their work spread further around. So in all but one case, they were really happy to sign the license. So yeah, I chose the non-commercial no derivatives really as a way just to protect them, to give them an extra layer of protection. Whereas I think if it had just been my own work, I wouldn't necessarily have needed to put those restrictions in.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Useful perspective. So I think, Emma, have we got another question for, I think it might be for Claire.
Yes, so Claire, we've had a question. Do you receive royalties for the print copies of your book?
I had a little bit, not much. So it was more at the beginning when things were selling a little bit more. I mean, the book is now 6 years old, so less likely. Stuff still comes in occasionally, but it's not an enormous amount.
Brilliant, thank you, Claire. We also had a question. Claire and Joanna's presentations are hugely helpful in terms of advocacy. I wonder whether it would be possible for snippets of those presentations to be used internally by us when we are communicating internally about the policy. Would that be something you'd be happy to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess they can simply link to this recording will be made available, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it will be. I think that it does kind of talk to that wider point. So there's quite a lot of questions around communication and everything, and we will be able to share people's presentations, the recording, but we also had a bit of an exchange earlier about a shorter one-size-fits-all, here's all the information pack. So that is being worked on at the moment. We did that for the articles policy, but I suppose perhaps we also need to think about ways in which we can also share other experiences of authors, as well as Claire and Joanna, for people to learn from. So we shall pick that up, and maybe if it's okay as well, Claire and Joanna, just liaise with you specifically about whether there's anything else we can do that would be helpful.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I'm back. Sorry, everything.
Okay, all right. So are there other, I don't know if other members of the panel wish to ask each other any questions or points, or if there are any questions for members of the audience, please place that in the Q&A.
Sorry about that, Rachel. We had a bit of a blip. I think we're back now. So we have a question for Matthew. We're struggling to pull together data on how many UKRI funded annual eligible outputs we publish. Can you say how you approach gathering this data and what sources you used?
Yes, certainly. So this is really where I have to credit Martin with a lot of this work, who's doing really the number crunching there. So we used two ways of calculating this. One was going through and looking at the our internal records and the various entries going into the university repository, and looking at those individually to see how many would potentially fit under the policy, and coming up with a rough number. So that was very manual, very number crunchy. It is you would say probably a rough and ready estimate. And that came up with a figure, but that figure then correlated with the second form and way we calculated this, which was by looking at the total amounts of UKRI funding of open access that is allocated currently to the University of Liverpool. So looking at the University of Liverpool's portion of the total UKRI funding around open access, and using this as a proxy to determine the proportion of the number of eligible outputs UKRI previously released as their estimate that will fall within the policy requirements. So in previous correspondence, previous statements, correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel, I hope you're not going to say that we are wrong now, because that would be really embarrassing, was that UKRI estimated around 350 publications PA would fall under the policy. We then took a proportion of what Liverpool receives in terms of open access funding at the moment through the block grant, and that was then used to derive and calculate a figure, as it were, of how much that would cost on an annual basis. So both of those approaches, one looking at the portion that we receive in terms of UKRI funding currently, and looking at that as a percentage of total UKRI funding and mapping that onto the number of eligible predicted outputs under the policy that UKRI released previously, which is the 350, and looking at the number of entries within the university repository and the number of publications that we're aware of that we would see as being under the policy. Those figures came out as the same. So that's really what we used in terms of the calculation. Then what Martin did is go through in terms of our BPCs and the value of BPCs from a range of publishers who we work with to establish an estimated average BPC cost, and that's what we use then to calculate the number of publications. So effectively, if I'm just giving you the worked example, we estimated that there probably be about 10 publications a year from the University of Liverpool that fall under the policy. That is our rough figure in terms of long form monographs. We're then able to use that figure to calculate how much the total cost might be to have as a rolling fund. I hope that's clear. That was a slightly convoluted description.
That's great. Thank you, Matthew. We have another question for Joanna. So Joanna, you mentioned that your experience of working with smaller OA publishers was that they were more efficient. Can you say in what way they were, what aspects or what functions?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got no idea what's going on behind the scenes as to what systems might be different. I can only really talk about my own perspective as an author. But compared to the sort of more traditional presses that I published with, even though that was open access, that generally took 18 months to 2 years for the book to appear in print after receiving the sort of final manuscript. Whereas with the OA publishers that I was using in the UK, that was typically 6 months. And as I said before, there was no sort of loss of attention paid to the book in any way at all. They just seemed to be either running processes concurrently, perhaps, or they had more members of the team working on different aspects. I'm not quite sure. But I was really, I guess what I wanted to say was that I was really happy with my experience with them, because I think that can be a concern that authors have, that by not going with a kind of really well-known prestigious publisher, you may have less of a good experience. In my experience, it was completely the opposite. I had a much better experience with the kind of smaller, more independent publishers.
Brilliant. Thank you, Joanna. We've had a question for Christy and Thomas. Are you now looking at establishing an institutional OA fund to pay for OA monograph or chapter publication, since you'll need to pay for this upfront and then reclaim the cost from UKRI?
I'm happy to get this, Tom, and you can jump in. So we are very fortunate at the Royal College of Art that we're in receipt of the specialist provider QR funding. And I think that's going to serve as our way of paying up front. But I recognize that not all small institutions will have access to that. So yes, I think if we didn't have that budget to fall back on, we would have to find budget somewhere to cover this. We are looking at getting together an open access long form pot of money to support non-UKRI funded projects, which will probably come from the specialist provider funding as well. So yes, that's the sort of winding answer to say but we're in a unique position, I think, to be able to do that. And we recognize it's a challenge for other institutions. Tom, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think you've covered it. The only thing I would add is that if we want to cover long form publications using that grant, that fund, we would need to expand it quite significantly in terms of the value that we have in there, because BPCs are potentially so much more than APCs, and one BPC currently would probably take up quite a lot of the fund that we do have. So
just to quickly add to that, I'm not sure if this may have been answered or commented on already, so apologies. I saw there were a few questions about where BPC is in excess of the maximum amount that UKRI will fund, and whether institutions are expected to pay for that shortfall, or whether that means that publisher perhaps can't be covered by the OA policy. Again, if we had a shortfall, we'd have to fall back on our specialist provider funding. Again, I know that's a concern for other small specialists.
That's great. Thank you very much, both. We have a question now for Jisc. So one challenge for HEIs is knowing where researchers are actually publishing in. The library did some research drawing on, e.g. ref, but this is always retrospective. Do you have any tips, advice, how best to gather this information more efficiently and keep it up to date?
My goodness, that's quite a question, because in our work with the publishers, they don't tend to routinely record that information either, so it is a bit of a black hole. I don't know, could I pass that back over to any of the institutions to see how they can record the information?
Doesn't seem to be the case.
It doesn't seem like it. I guess as things progress and everyone gets more used to having to record this information, then we'll get more of an evidence base. But I think at the moment everybody's kind of having to, get those figures in the manner that Matthew's explained previously.
Brilliant, thank you. So another question is, Matthew mentioned the need to promote and foster BPC-free OA publishing for all, not just focusing on schemes, charges that can be shown to directly benefit an institution's own authors. Do you have any advice on how we can do that?
I don't think any silver bullets, but one of the things that we've been really reflecting on is the need for academics to be part of that conversation. And that a lot of our conversations around this have been across the library sector and with information professionals, not always with academics in the room. So the part of the reason and why I've mentioned advocacy several times in the presentation is actually to use the policy as the opportunity to talk about the various options which are available in there. And part of the reason why I think we're excited to do that in Liverpool is the fact that we have LUP, who's very closely associated with the university, who's has done a lot of work in this space, but actually having that academic engagement as well with library colleagues. So that would be my sort of first gut reaction is having that discussion and having that cross-sector cross-sector debate, because I think there's a lot can be achieved by that, and certainly a lot of the forums that I attend, which are wonderful, and the library colleagues talking to library colleagues, where we have been absent is some of the academic engagement, and I think that's really where we need to take some of our efforts moving forward, and the policy is a great opportunity for that.
And I see Graham Stone has made a comment in terms of the gathering of information, and a good point, Graham. So we will actually see information as we gather things from stage one through this process. Indeed.
Okay, thank you. We've had another question that's a joint question for UKRI and Jisc. To follow up on the question about inequities in the two-tier funding model, I'm not clear on who will be able to access 10K versus who will be able to access 6K. What is your definition of a diamond model / publisher?
I'll take that one. Well, it's really about the model that the title is being published under, rather than the actual publisher. Because as an example, we've got Taylor and Francis, who we're doing a pilot model with for Diamond. So if a title was published under that agreement, then the £6,000 limit would apply. But if a title was published via a BPC route, then the 10,000 limit would apply. So it's very much down to the licensing agreement that's available. So although a lot of the Born OA presses, the new university presses, they're all offering library membership models because they're open access only, so they don't publish behind a paywall at all. So they would tend to be library membership models, and then the £6,000 amount would apply. And of course, the fees for those library membership models are a lot less than a BPC rate. So that's how it kind of works that way. I hope that helps.
Can I ask, Caroline, have you got an actual guide on the Jisc website about the different models? I know you have been publishing information recently.
Off the top of my head, I would say we have a page on our website called Our Role in Open Access, and I think it's all under there. Anna, correct me if I'm wrong though.
It's on there, and it's also, which I'll pop that in the chat in a minute. So we also have produced a series of 1 pages which do go through all the different models and explain their differences. So again, I'll pop that in the chat when we've finished.
And I think, I mean, we should make sure that as we put the final, more synopsis-y guide together, that we make sure we've got some succinct definitions around this to help, I think, guide people in that. And also I would just say that I heard or saw, sorry, a question from Pablo de Castro and also Katie Hughes agreed about contacting UKRI funded researchers or researchers/authors, same people. So yeah, we will be doing that. So we have got our mailing list of active researchers together. And they, as will heads of research organisations, all be receiving a letter that points to the latest information and guidance, but also directs them to engage with research offices and libraries around the process. So that is, yeah, not far off. So it should go out next week, I believe. It may be the week after, but I think it's next week. I'm getting my dates a little bit muddled, but I think it's next week. So yeah, that's in preparation.
Thanks, Rachel. So we have a question on the prestige point. Has anyone faced any skepticism or criticism about their OA work having a lack of prestige?
I could answer that one. No, I don't think I ever have faced any criticism or even implied criticism. I guess I'm aware that some of my colleagues are making different decisions about which publishers to go for, and that quite often they are talking about wanting to go for really prestigious publishers. It's not something that I've been particularly concerned about. I think that, I've always looked at a publisher's backlist and seen that they're publishing really good quality books. And, I tend to think that a good quality book is a good quality book, regardless of who it's published with. And that actually really what perhaps a lot of us need to be doing is publishing with these excellent, really high quality publishers that perhaps don't have the name yet. And then, of course, that will create a sort of more interest around those publishers that are doing a fantastic job.
Thanks, Joanna. Rachel, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think that covers it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So another question is, does the panel have any advice on how to advise our academic colleagues about how they get their monographs published in the various publishing initiatives, like the Open Access Community Framework to take to?
I missed some of those words, Emma. I don't know if another colleague is able to cut and paste that into the chat, or because there's so many questions in the Q&A, I can't tell which one it is, I'm afraid. Try again, Emma, see if you're reconnected.
So Tahir's popped that question in the chat, but the question was, does the panel have any advice on how to advise our academic colleagues about how they can get their monographs published using the various publishing initiatives like the Open Book Collective or the Open Access Community Framework, to take just two?
So I think that would be best, with you, Caroline.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I guess really if your authors are aware of the need to publish open access, the best thing they can do is to talk to their publisher to stress that they need to publish open access and to just start discussing these different routes. And to complement that, we'll be talking to publishers. I mean, there's hundreds of publishers out there, so we're starting with the bigger ones because that's where we will make the most impact. But yes, we'll be talking to publishers as well about all these different routes to publication. The open access community framework that was mentioned is aimed at not-for-profit and for new university presses. So yeah, we're certainly happy to promote that through our through Jisc. Yeah, I guess just talking really and raising awareness of these different models, that's the way to go. And the more that become available, the more I think publishers will see, hopefully that they're a success and they'll want to get on board as well. So yeah, it will grow as time progresses.
Thanks, Caroline. And I just wondered, Matt, just because obviously it connects back to your point about advocacy around these models, whether you've got any comment on that specifically.
Like specifically, no, because I'm not specifically engaged in that, and I wouldn't want to hazard that. But I think what Anna's just said in terms of, sorry, it was Caroline just said, in terms of the active engagement and discussion. I know our open research teams working with individual departments, individual academics, Open Research Week, much of their work and their engagement and liaison is about not only raising awareness of open access, obviously as a whole, and open research as a whole, but then the suite and the variety of things and routes which individual academics can be undertaken. So that engagement, that discussion, that raising awareness is going to be critical. And I'll post a link to some of their activities in chat as well.
I mean, I suppose there is also, of course, because there's lots of different levels, aren't there, in terms of the way in which this ecosystem works. So there are also loads of international discussions as well, I think, between different stakeholder groups around this progression. And in general, I would just observe that there is a healthy interest from, I think, publishers, researchers and libraries and research officers and funders in this direction of travel. So it seems to be something where there is also, a real space for collective discussion across stakeholders. Unlike, I think, in some spaces where it can be slightly different points of view. I'm not saying there aren't diverse points of view here, but it seems to be a space for fruitful exchange, yeah, we are, in general, I would just say that we're seeing progress towards people thinking that it's really the way to go, and that we ought to, at this point in time, try to move forward with more open and equitable and the sorts of more sustainable models. So and I mean, I think you can see that with things like OARPN and the way in which around the OARPN services, for those, lots of people might not have heard about OARPN, but it's a set of different services which help with the discovery of open access books, and actually just puts a lot of those shared services around it, and that really is a broker between all different stakeholders, and that doesn't happen so much in all output spaces.
Can I just add there, Rachel, as well, that Jisc is a partner in the Palomira project, which is looking at aligning OA policies from across Europe as well. So, that's another way that we can gain traction.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So a question about when authors ask who best to contact in their institution about applying for stage 1, who would you recommend we suggest? Is there any best practice being shared between institutions at the moment in terms of who deals with these applications? And this question is from a Learned Society book series editor.
I would say that from the discussions that we have had, it seems to be that libraries are actively taking an approach to be the lead, but I don't think that will always be the case. But I would like to ask colleagues, so Matt and Christy and Thomas, if you have something to add to that.
Just to echo it from a research library perspective, we're a member of Research Libraries UK, as colleagues will be on the call, and also Sconnell, and certainly libraries, not in all instances, but I would say definitely in the majority are leading these conversations and engagement. So I'll just echo what you say, Rachel. It is the library is an important factor in this.
Christy, Thomas, anything to add? Thomas?
Yeah, I think we're similar, but as it is, it's quite split at the RCA actually, and because we're a smaller institution, it tends to be individuals that people will approach, knowing that someone has particular expertise. So I think either with us it would be Christy or myself, but the library is heavily involved, and we're using these sort of expected publication schedules. So we have a very specific document that we give out to UKRI funded academics that records this information as well. So.
Thank you. And I noticed in the chat, someone, Anna Collins, has said that, you know, at her university, it would be the research office. And I think, you know, that is going to be the tendency of the split. So there is always a bit of information flows from various. So, for example, if it's the research office, then making sure that your authors are aware that the research office is the lead and coordinator, and therefore can communicate with publishers that they're engaging with.
Thanks, Rachel. I think we've got time for one last question. So have any library colleagues on the panel looked at the other end of OA monographs, i.e. promoting use of OA in titles for use in education, on reading lists, etc.?
Any comments on that?
Just want to reread the question, apologies. Maybe another colleague if anyone's got a reflection.
So it's about promoting books on reading lists, is that correct, Emma?
Yes, yes. So promoting OA titles on reading lists and things like that.
Certainly we do. Certainly we do promote OA books, and actually one of the things that we've just launched is a student partners program where we have a series of student roles across libraries, museums and galleries. We've got 18 student roles. These are new roles, and one of them is around being an open access advocate. So this is an undergraduate student who is really raising some of the key principles around open access, around sustainability and equity, and the benefits of using OA works as well. So promoting OA content, not just in terms of reading lists, but actually OA principles to our students is something I begin to do here in Liverpool.
Okay, thank you. I think we're almost at time, Rachel. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma, for relaying those questions, and thank you very much for all of the inputs from the panelists. So what I will comment on it, there's obviously, you know, a ripe space here to exchange and practice and learn as we go, which I really I tried to emphasize earlier that we really do have that intention in UKRI to make sure that we are engaging with stakeholders as the policy is rolled out and throughout the implementation of the policy, and where we can to help facilitate exchange and best practice, but also, of course, to learn from others and your experience to improve our policy as well. So that really is our intention. Now we move to the next bit of the event, and I will just mention one more time, thank you very, very much for everyone's presentations. It's been really useful to have this whole range of views, perspectives and information. And once again, remind everyone that the range of unanswered questions will be answered, and we will provide a summary, as well as making sure that the recording of the webinar is available and the materials. So we're now moving to the breakout rooms. So I think that since all the formal webinar proceedings now have come to a close, we can go to the discussion sessions and breakout rooms. So let me see if I can get these instructions correct. So you can self-select to join a breakout room. And it's at the bottom right-hand corner where you've got the 3 dots and more, I believe. I can't see them. Join a breakout room. Yes. So if you go to more and hover your mouse over, then you should get breakout rooms in progress. And you will see there are 6. So 1 focused around arts and humanities research, 1 focused around social sciences, 2 for library and research office support staff, and there are 2 general discussion rooms as well. There's about, I think, 5 minutes for you to select those and then join. The purpose, as we said, is really, nothing will be attributed, but it's a chance, hopefully, for others to share any tips, tricks, concerns, solutions, stories, anecdotes, and we will then come back just to have a brief share of the highlights or the key critical points from each group. And so it's just half an hour of discussion and then a short report back. I'm seeing that people seem to say there's a bit of a problem here. No more for me either. So yeah, it's the 3 dots with more on the lower right hand side of the screen. Does anyone else? I don't know if pop-ups are blocked, so you may not see it apparently. I don't know if Laura can help, who is managing. So Laura says, so event support, that is, expand your screen to show breakout rooms. It may also depend if you have pop-ups blocked or an older version of a Zoom app. And is there no other way to do this, Laura? So basically, if they've got they have to unblock their pop-ups.
Hi, Rachel. So this is the first
Hi.
time I've actually used the breakout
Right.
rooms within a webinar environment. It's usually only destined for meetings. The breakout rooms usually just pop up with the option to join at the bottom of your Zoom window. It may be a local issue that you've got pop-ups blocked on your system because it does actually open in a separate window. Or if you are on an older version of Zoom and it's not been updated, it may not be showing. You have the option of having people raise their hand in this one if anyone's got anything to contribute, and I can put the raise hand icon back on and you can have a large interaction in this meeting room. We can give people the chance to talk. Just trying to work off the cuff.
Sorry, you're saying that we could bring people back. Oh, we're recording again now because we're doing our high level report backs. I just want to say that it was quite incredible. We had so many technical difficulties, but then in the end we ended up with 40 people and it was a really good discussion. So thank you very much for all of those inputs. So I'm going to go to group 1 for feedback, and I believe that's Catherine.
It is, yes, thank you. So
hello.
Yes, so yeah, we were focused specifically on the arts and humanities, but had quite a wide-ranging discussion, and there were people from researchers there, research office staff, but also libraries, publishers as well. So it was and Jisc, so it was a really good group, good discussion. So we got through quite a few different things. There was some specific questions around sort of if you're publishing in an edited collection with a number of, say, European authors, and they're not required to publish open access from their funder in a specific country, then can there be an exemption there if you're not the lead author? So we had quite a conversation around that, and Graham from Jisc was helpful in pointing out that actually a number of European countries are quite ahead of us in terms of open access, and so it may well be that it's required for the other authors as well. Question about the fund, and if you're committed to produce a series of outputs as a result of your UKRI funded grant, it might actually go beyond that 7 years by the time the last volume is published. So can we have some kind of room for manoeuvre there in terms of the 7 years if we've committed to fund a series? A conversation around whether the artistic integrity is undermined in a digital format, and that actually having something in a printed format is a very different output than online, and actually that open access doesn't mean that there's no printed version, and that in some cases open access versions can lead to further print sales, as we heard this morning. So it's not that it's either or, that there can still be a printed version of your output. And then we had quite a conversation around sort of the reselling of your outputs on Amazon, and how things can be misused and then turned into another sort of printed format and resold that you don't then benefit from, and how particular sort of licenses may get around that, and so trying to think about particularly also the misuse of data in where you've published open access, and if your research is on a particularly sensitive topic, how that then could be used by people in a less than positive way. And that all came us back to thinking about sort of the importance of case studies, which was mentioned again this morning, and how we can showcase the positive impact of open access, and whether there's a role there for UKRI, AHRC, others to pull together those case studies. And as we heard this morning about sort of researchers and how they found that experience, what we can do there. And then finally, we had quite a conversation around Diamond, and what that means, and who can afford what, and particularly the impact on smaller institutions. And that came back to a final point about that there's a real gap in knowledge about open access within the arts and humanities, and a lot of people really are unclear about open access, what it means, what this policy will mean for them. And so how can we do more to share information, encourage information sharing between institutions, what role organisations like ARMA and RL UK have to play in that, so that we can really show positive impact of open access, but also just share information so that it's more well known about.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And social science, we didn't run the social science session. So then I'm moving to discussion group 3. So was that you, Paul? That's you.
That's me.
Sorry, I've got Sarah down, but because Sarah's unwell. Yes. So this was one of the groups on library and research support staff. Paul.
I think I got the main points, but I might ask Gerald to chip in.
Yeah, it's only supposed to be a couple of main points and takeaways.
So we had quite a bit of focus on sort of I guess finance concerns, particularly around the sort of having to claim back costs and how those might be covered, particularly in small research organisations, and how that payments might align with financial years within organisations and how their budgets are structured. So there's I think that aligns with some broader questions we've had throughout. We also had a bit of a discussion around the link between the author, the research organisation and the publisher, and how often the research organisation might not be aware of things, or the researcher might still go ahead to try and get the payment themselves and stuff like that. So a bit of thinking for us in our sort of final comms and guidance, for example, about how we clearly signpost who the author needs to speak to, including the research organisation and our various outputs. And so and other bits like that. We had a bit of focus on diamond models. I guess sorts of general concerns about them being quite new, the practice isn't quite there, and potentially quite risky sort of signing up to those without necessarily knowing if there's going to be UKRI outputs. I think we did have a bit of discussion on that around sort of the policies there to also sort of facilitate I guess, transition more broadly and not just sort of policy compliance and stuff as well, but clearly there's a lot of new things to consider there. There's just ask from a Jisc perspective, some guidance on helping ROs to assess RMP agreements around monographs might be quite helpful. We had a bit of discussion around PhDs. Obviously, there's the exception, but obviously we're encouraging those to be in scope of fund and stuff. And then like a bit of thinking around sort of the scenarios that might happen around there. Things are happening many years down the line and the researchers left or was abroad and stuff like that as well. So there might be some nuances that come up there that we need to think about. We had a bit of discussion on PIDs and discoverability and making sure how we monitor these outputs are being used or encouraging it. So I think we had a bit of discussion there where we recognise that policy isn't really focused on that now, but that's sort of an area of best practice that policy might stimulate development and certainly UKRI wants to remain involved with and sort of from a community basis. And then there was a bit of discussion at the end around funding for third-party materials and just being a bit clear on that, and is there more of a role for the research organisation in sort of not policing that but sort of facilitating that and so on. I think those were the main points. Cheryl, do shout if there's anything major I missed.
Thumbs up from Cheryl there. Thank you. So, okay, I think it's Emma's group now, which was also library and research support staff.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. So we started by talking about what sort of communications have been happening within organisations, and there was feedback that maybe people have been waiting for UKRI to share some more information about the scheme before they started doing a lot of comms with researchers. It was rightly recognised that obviously open access for monographs is a really good thing, and so there's a desire to use the UKRI policy as a springboard to encouraging more open access, and researchers are also keen to do that as well. We talked about the communications that UKRI is sending, and there's general consensus that it would be very helpful if organisations could also see the letters that we're sending to researchers, and it would be useful to send it to groups like the block grant holders, and also comments that the slide deck that we provided has been very useful in the past, so the appreciation that that's going to be updated and shared. And we talked about the different lists that might be able to be shared with, like UK Core and ARMA. We talked about perhaps publishing the letter to researchers online. That would be helpful for organisations to see what we've shared. Desire for it to be really clear, particularly around the references to the 7-year threshold, because that's going to be an important question that comes from researchers. And also somewhere having an answer to the question about my publisher's charges more than 10k, what do I do? That was a question that came across quite strongly, and it would be useful to have answers to that. Another question that we would like an answer to is about whether high BPCs can be classed as an exception to the policy. It'd be good to have a clear answer to that from UKRI. We talked about that anything that we can do to help is very useful, because the organisations and the staff within them are stretched very thin, and it can often be difficult to cascade these communications about open access across organisations. And it would be very, very useful for us to provide some offline information with regard to the stage 1 application form, so perhaps a spreadsheet or a PDF, so that people can see the questions offline without going into the system to provide those. There was a request about whether we could share the applications that we're getting with organisations, and I said that I will take that back and ask about that with data protection. We talked about specific communities. Didn't feel there were particular questions coming from specific communities, although it was stressed that PhD students do have a lot of concerns about the policy and how this could apply. Question about third-party rights costs and when and where these can be charged, so when they can be charged to the grant or when they should be charged to the fund. And also really stressing to how we can stress in our communications that it's really valuable for potential authors to have these conversations with their organisations as early as possible in the project, so that they're aware of potential publications that are going to be coming from the UKRI funding. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Emma. Yeah, I suppose because there's a bit of a crossover, isn't there? in terms of we will be looking at outputs that come from existing research, but as we transition into new research projects, perhaps some of that will become easier. So Sarah.
Hello. Yes, so we started with a grand total of 1 in our group, which had doubled by the end of the session. So there were quite a few sort of UKRI and Jisc people there, though, so we had a bit of a discussion. Though some of the questions from the external people that came up were around sort of what happens if people are stuck between institutions following redundancy or the end of a contract also, and particularly in regards to contacting them and making sure they're involved and aware of their options, which was felt might fall between the gaps to some extent. There was again a question around what happens and your options when the cost, the BPC being quoted is going to be higher than an existing than the limit that UKRI has set, and then there's general discussion about the impact of the BPC on the publishing market and which way that might go. Just sort of batted some ideas around there, and then. There was a further question around the Fund for Libraries supporting Diamond Access and how sort of information for small publishers on how best to direct authors and what are the implications around that and how best to manage that. I mean, that's something they're working on themselves, but it's sort of something that sort of guidance might be helpful on. I don't know if Anna or Rebecca had anything to add to that.
I think that pretty much covered it. I think, Rebecca, is there anything you want to add?
Not for me. It was great talking to everyone though, even though we were very UKRI and Jisc heavy.
All right. Okay. So that actually, does that mean that's all of our groups done, apart from the impromptu group that I was in? Which we had, so we had lots of technical difficulties. Then we ran it in the main session, because obviously I wasn't supposed to be facilitating groups, so I wasn't very good at it either. But then we managed to get microphones on. So very similar to some of the issues raised, I will just mention a couple. So a bit of a concern about some of the workflows between stage 1 and stage 2 in the process in particular. So is there a risk that there are books that are submitted and say perhaps authors do submit on Citizen Space, and that means that a research organisation in a way is committed to pay for this output? We don't think it's a big risk, but people were concerned about it. We know we've got all of that guidance in place to try and avoid it, but it is something to think about. Also, similarly to some of the other discussions I heard, so a lot about the way in which the workflows are changing within organisations and the importance of some of the conversations between authors and research office stroke library, because of the way in which this is working and how that's a real change in terms of the way in which conversations work around publishing these sorts of outputs at the moment. And also the fact that financial planning and cycles and aligning with diamond agreements is going to take a period of change, and so there are some complexities there. There was a specific question around royalties, and that can quite often be pushed back. People shared information around it, and I think in general, and one of the key things, we saw it really in the webinar chat as well, that one of the critical things to get really au fait with this policy is that it applies to a subset of academic books, and they're in, the definitions are in Annex 1, and the issue around royalties tends to be in the space of literary works, and those are out of scope of this policy, so you do not need those to be open access, and they don't fall within this policy, and that's where the biggest issue is there. Also a bit of discussion around the funding service and how it's all new, and again training being required and materials, and I think I heard in some of the other sessions the issues about so what happens if an author changes institution, and in particular what happens when they change institution between stage 1 and stage 2. Can we clarify some of those different scenarios and just make sure it's really clear to people, and again in general a lot about you could tell once we got going that there's loads of expertise, ideas, although a huge diversity of organisations. So again, it's not one size fits all, but somehow we've got to improve some of the information flows and share best practice between different stakeholders as we all embark on this journey to open access long form outputs together. So those were the main, I tried to be like high level in terms of the main points that we covered, but I have captured them. So we are 1 minute to. I want to thank all of the facilitators. I also really want to thank all of the participants because it has actually been quite a long webinar. And I'm really pleased that people did stay and engage in the discussion sessions. Because there's a lot of rich information, and you know sometimes some points that people raised, they've come up in the formulation of things, but then they become less prominent. But you've reminded us again of some of these communication issues and the importance of case studies, for instance, and guidance. So and really working with sector bodies to make sure the policy implementation is as easy as possible and as supported as possible. So thank you so much, and thanks for being with us, and we will share materials as soon as possible. And as you know, we've got our big now comms campaign to get information out there. Thank you.